think the BBC should hold its head in shame. I really do. If you've been a doctor in Gaza, would you please stand up? All of you, please. I'm going to do a question and answer for a little while, but I'd just like to say something first. Congratulations on that film. I'm not sure that's probably the right word, but I feel like it's one of the most important films I've ever seen, certainly most moving. I might need a minute here. It needed to be seen. It really did need to be seen. I think everyone will agree with that. I think the BBC should hold its head in shame. I really do. As someone that's worked for the corporation for 30 years, to see the way it's declined in the last year or two has been devastating, really, because I've defended it against claims that it's partial. It talks about impartiality all the time, and the truth is, at the moment, at the very top of the BBC, not the BBC all, because there are thousands and thousands of people, as you know, that work at the BBC that are good people that understand what is going on here and can see it. We're seeing it on our phones every day. And the problem is they're bowing to the pressure from the top, and this is a worry. And I think time's coming where a lot of people are going to be answerable to this, and complicity is something that will come to many. Anyway, let me get on with the important part and introduce our guests here. A little introduction of our panelists. Let me start with Victoria Rose, or Rosie, as she likes to be called, consultant plastic surgeon at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospitals. Worked at the NHS for 30 years since you were a child. Yeah. She's been going to Gaza regularly with the charity Ideal since 2018, has returned 3 times since October 2023. You were last there in Gaza in May. Khalil Mazen, general practitioner from Gaza with over 2 years of clinical experience. He worked extensively at the Indonesian hospital, where he served in the emergency and intensive care units during some of the most critical parts of the conflict. He's currently in the UK, having just taken his exams for membership of the Royal College of Surgeons. And Rebecca Inglis. Rebecca is an intensive care doctor who's been visiting Gaza to teach medical students since 2016. She co-founded the social media platform Gaza Medic Voices and works with Healthcare Workers Watch, a Palestinian-led organisation that collects evidence regarding attacks on healthcare workers in Gaza. Beck's worked closely with the team from the very beginning, a year and a half ago, providing evidence of attacks, the latest figures, and helping to corroborate information. The filmmakers on the other side, Ramita Navai, Karim Shah, and Ben Dapir. Sorry. Yeah. I don't think you have any peers. I don't think I need to introduce you, and I'm going to start most of the questions this side and then come to you a little bit and talking about the film and how you went about it in a little while. But I just want to say well done on this, and I can't imagine how many barriers have been put in your way over this time, and well done. It needs to be seen. It needs to be seen everywhere. Victoria, perhaps I can start with you, Rosie. Rosie, I should call you. Tell us about your experiences there and the injuries that you had to deal with, and how many of these people.
So I'm very fortunate in that I'm a plastic surgeon, and we are quite thin on the ground in Gaza. So every time I turn up, I get given a theatre, and I don't have to fight for cases; they just come. So I think our last trip in May, I had a theatre every day for, I think, the 29 days that we were there. We worked non-stop. We started at 8 a.m. and we finished most evenings. The elective work we would finish probably about 10 or 11. We did probably 10 to 12 booked cases, so they would be people that I'd seen the day before that I said needed to be operated on, and we would do those. And then after that we'd do a ward round of who we'd operated on the day before, and we'd see anyone else that they wanted us to see. And occasionally we'd be called into the main hospital to operate on some of the emergency cases. But of the 10 cases that we would routinely do every day, the first, I'd say 6 would be children, and they were never older than 15. The youngest I think that we did this time was 3 months, which was a burn injury, a child that had been blown up in their home. And most of them were around the age of 7. They were, for the bulk of when we were there, they were blast injuries, so all involved in explosions. A lot of the time, the children that we operated on, we would find out later that they were the only survivor in their family and that they had been orphaned. And our colleagues at NASA, I think, told us when we left that there were 42,000 orphan children in Gaza at that time. We had run out of analgesia when we were there, so we had a scenario where we would operate on 6 children every day, and we probably finished the kids by about 2 o'clock, and until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon you would just hear children screaming in the recovery area. And then at about 3 o'clock the adults would start, and then you'd get a bit of respite from that.
Has it changed you as a person and as a doctor living through this?
I don't think it has changed me. I think lots of people say, you need to have...
Affected you, perhaps, is a better question.
I think that the thing is, we're doctors, so I'm not averse to telling people that they're going to die. I do a lot of cancer recon. This isn't the first time I've seen a child lose an arm. But the difference here is the volume of children that I've seen, and the fact that every child I've ever seen in London that's lost an arm or a leg, that's been an absolute travesty, accident, unavoidable. And that this is man-made, and at any moment it could be stopped, and that is what is really difficult to deal with.
I've seen you, and I follow you on Instagram, and you decided to become, I suppose, more on social media. You started to do interviews with people, and I was speaking to you just before, and that started at a certain point. What drove you to do that? Because do you feel in a way that because journalists are not allowed in, that you as doctors have almost become the journalists as well as doctors?
I think it was the narrative that was going on that made us decide this time that our main aim was to bear witness. And I think the first thing that started to get me going was the way in which every media outlet that I dealt with, particularly in the UK, who were calling us constantly while we were in Gaza to give interviews, kept referring to the Ministry of Health as the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. And I think that makes people in the UK think that all of the doctors and nurses I'm working with have got AK-47 strapped to their back and they're working for Hamas. And that really started to annoy me, because my colleagues in Gaza work tirelessly They have been displaced, all of them. They've been displaced about 15 times. They have no money, they have no food, and they are working 24, 40-hour shifts. And there is no way these people have got the time or the energy to get involved in Hamas. And that was the first moment that I thought that I needed to speak up. And then I think this time the GHF shooting that happened when we were there, and I got asked to give up my operating list to deal with some of the shootings, which is quite a big ask for a surgeon. So I said I would go over to the emergency department just to see what was happening. And on that day, I had already agreed to do an interview with BBC Radio 5. And when I got to the emergency department, I stepped over 17 dead bodies. And at that point, the doctor that was running emergencies estimated that we'd had 150 gunshot wounds, and it was packed. The place was packed, and there were no beds left. People were on the floors. And as I got over to the nursing station, the phone went, and this researcher from Radio 5 said to me, "Will you give an interview this evening?" I said, I'm in the middle of a mass casualty. And he said, "Is the GFH shooting?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Will Israel say they haven't shot anyone?" And that's when I said to Philip, "You need to put this video out on Instagram now."
Israel say a lot of things. Tunnels under hospitals. Do you do you ever see them, or is that?
I've been going to Gaza since about 2018. I've never seen a tunnel under a hospital. I've never looked, to be honest. Whenever I go, I'm always really busy. Believe it or not, I'm always in the operating theatre, operating or on the ward. But I've never seen a tunnel. I've never met anyone in military uniform in the hospital. I've never seen any guns in Gaza apart from those that the IDF have got. So when they said that the GFH shootings had been carried out by the locals, that was very hard for us to swallow, because we've never seen any of the Palestinians with guns. It's not a common sight. So yeah, it's a very one-way narrative.
Yeah. Can I ask Khalil a couple of questions? Can you describe what it's like working there as a doctor over the last period of time?
Well, at first, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be between you today.
Thank you for being
here. Before I start my speaking, I would like to apologize in advance if my English fails to fully convey the depth of what we experience in Gaza. The reality on the ground is far beyond what words in any language can describe. And to help me share the situation as accurately as possible, I will refer to some notes I prepared earlier during my reflections. So thank you for your understanding. At first, working as a doctor in Gaza is an experience unlike any other. It means practicing medicine under siege in a system that has been dismantled. It means delivering care in hospitals that are barely functioning with critically limited resources, constant power outages, and the ever-present threat of airstrike. During the recent war, I served in the intensive care unit in Gaza, at Indonesian hospital in the north of Gaza, for 4 consecutive months. Those were the most difficult months of my life, both personally and professionally. We often had to trace multiple critically injured patients simultaneously, sometimes placing 2 or more on a single bed. We lacked essential supplies like ventilators, medications, anesthesias, and also painkillers, even food and clean water. And for myself, I remember that for an entire 1 month, we survived on just 2 pieces of bread a day with no food to accompany them at Indonesian hospital in December 2023. One particular incident I will never forget involved a young child with a severe head injury who required ventilation. The power had gone out and our oxygen supplies were depleted. For over an hour, we manually ventilated her using a hand pump, praying she would survive. At the same time, the hospital was shelled. This was not an isolated experience. This became our daily reality. And also, we are losing a lot of our colleagues in Gaza. One of them is Dr. Isra. Dr. Isra was my colleague in the ICU at Indonesian hospital, was on shift with me the day before she was murdered. She had brought us some dates from the palm tree in her home, and the next morning she left the hospital to return to their home. That same evening, Dr. Isra came back to us, but not for her shift. This time, she returned as martyr, with brain matter out. And just yesterday, we lost Dr. Marwan Sultan, the head of the Indonesian hospital in the north of Gaza, and the only cardiologist doctor in the north of Gaza, who insisted to remain in the north, and he refused to leave the north toward the south. Yesterday, he was murdered with his wife and his daughter Mace after bombing their home in Jabalia camp. So this is the experience of how to be a doctor in Gaza.
What are you hearing now from your colleagues what colleagues you have left?
Yeah, in fact, what I'm hearing from my colleagues in Gaza who is heartbreaking and deeply distressing. Doctors on the ground are working under conditions that no medical professional should ever face. Hospitals have been destroyed or forced to shut down, and the few that are still functioning are overwhelmed, undersupplied, and operating without basic safety. Many of my colleagues report performing surgeries without anesthesia, using mobile phone flashlights for lighting in the operating theaters. Also, I recently spoke with a colleague who told me that they were reusing single-use items like Foley's catheter, especially in the north of Gaza. Yeah. Also, the psychological burden is also immense. Many doctors have lost their own family member while on duty. Some are continuing to work despite being displaced, injured, or mourning the deaths of loved ones. A number of my colleagues are sheltering in tents near their hospitals or even inside the hospitals itself, simply because they have nowhere else to go and feel a duty to stay with their patients. Yeah.
And obviously there will be an increasing shortage, I would imagine, of doctors as is it students are still studying there, aren't they, to train to be doctors?
Okay, this is a great question, and please give me a time to explain it.
Of course.
Yeah, yes. As I can speak it in it directly, as I am currently served as a teaching assistant in the Faculty of Medicine at Al-Azhar University. So at present, all of our students are studying online, and we record videos, lectures for them, and upload these videos on the website of the university, and then they can download these videos and they can study in their homes. So most of our students have no access to internet at home. So they are forced to travel to public spaces and cafes with internet service in order to download the videos and to study. This has come an enormous cost. To date, more than 20 medical students just from Al-Azhar University were killed while downloading these lectures, as such locations have become targets for airstrikes due to the concentration of people. This is from theoretical side of the crisis. The practical aspect of training has become nearly impossible. As you know, that the university buildings have been destroyed. Teaching hospitals have either been bombed or are operating on a full capacity, unable to accommodate students. So those few hospitals that remain are overwhelmed with trauma cases and lack of space or staff to support these medical students. Moreover, there is no functioning public transport system for these students to go to the hospitals and taking their training sessions. And finally, many of our students can no longer afford to pay to your university tuition, as you know. So this is the main problem for our students in Gaza, because the only money that their families have is just for food, for shelters, you know. So this is a big challenge for the students and for their families in Gaza.
Finally, Khalil, what would your message be to the world?
Well, I will send a message for my colleagues and also for the medical students. You choose this path because you want to help others. So what I experienced in Gaza is an extreme example of what that commitment truly means. Medicine is not just about clinics and white coats. It's about standing firm when everything else collapses. This is my message.
Bex, if I may, what are the consequences of these attacks on the healthcare system in Gaza overall?
So I think that we've just heard many of those consequences beautifully illustrated. And I think that what he was saying about the impact on the training of future doctors can't be underestimated. So he mentioned yesterday the targeted killing of a very senior, he was the head of the Indonesian hospital, as well as a highly trained heart specialist. He was a member of the university faculty, and as such had a huge role in teaching students. So his killing has enormous consequences, not just on the heart patients. So there's only two, he was one of two remaining cardiologists in Gaza. And so for all of the ones that he was serving, those patients no longer have access to his specialist skills. But also the students, and he taught hundreds of students who have all come out since he was killed yesterday with fond reminiscences about what he was doing as a teacher. And I think that aspect of things is often underestimated. We've seen whole specialties. So I was talking about heart specialty, cardiology, heart doctors there, but histopathologists, so the doctors who deal in diagnosing cancer. So they've been killed or detained, and that has meant that the ability to diagnose cancer, as well as the blockade of supplies going in, it means that patients are not getting their cancers diagnosed, and it means that those patients are not getting the surgery, getting the treatment that they need. Someone was telling me the other day that a close relative was operated on for a suspected cancer without having got the biopsy diagnosis beforehand. And that means that they're not getting any of the treatment that they actually need. A whole module in the medical student curriculum is no longer taught after a senior histopathologist was killed. I think that the ramifications, both in the immediate term and in the long term, are immense.
Tell me about using starvation as a weapon of war. Is that? I mean, the evidence seems pretty clear.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that gets covered to some degree, and I think people are aware that Israel is intentionally starving the people of Gaza. But what we've been able to collect, and as kind of medical colleagues, we see are some of the sequelae of that, and I'm sure both of you will have seen. I've got a colleague, Nick Maynard, in Gaza at the moment, who talks about doing operations for injuries that you'd be able to survive, survivable injuries, where the patients go on to die because they're so badly malnourished that their wounds don't heal, their wounds get infected, and so these are not being logged as direct malnutrition deaths, but these are affecting thousands of people right now. The other aspect that I think people fail to appreciate in terms of the medical consequences of starving an entire population are the generational effects. Every single person who is being starved in Gaza right now will have long-term effects, especially the children. So nutritional status for children is so important. And so these children are going to have cognitive, physical sequelae, for the long term. And I think that that's what is often underappreciated. We see pregnant women not able to breastfeed. All of these sorts of things are going to have a long-lasting and pretty devastating effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask you, Victoria, one more question? You might need the microphone. You see evidence as a doctor there of the targeting, direct targeting of people, children, with gunshots, etc.
Yeah, we definitely have. I think the big difference this time was the number of children and women that had been targeted. You can't say now that this is a targeted attack on a terrorist organisation. It's the blanket bombing of a population, and that's definitely what we saw this time. Hamas are not recruiting 3-month-old children, 7-year-old children, and that's the bulk of what we were operating on.
I'm going to start to talk about the film a little bit now, but I just want to thank you for your courage, really, and your bravery. It's remarkable. Mark, you're heroes. You genuinely are heroes. How difficult was this film to make? Whoever wants to answer that question, but
wow.
I mean, you were out there obviously a lot of the time.
So this whole story started about a year and a half ago. Where's Naveen Mabro? She here? Oh God.
She's shy.
She's having a chat on her phone outside. So this story came from Naveen, and I think it's really important to say that. So Naveen's childhood friend is somebody that Bex works with, and Naveen was told a year and a half ago through Tanya and Bex that doctors were going missing. So this is when they were going missing, and nobody knew they were being taken to black sites in Israeli detention. It took a few months for them to realise that actually hundreds of doctors were being taken and detained and tortured. So it took a while. There was a lag between these doctors going missing. That's when we started looking at this story. And, the actual making of this film has been possible because of the people here. I mean, big shout out to Bex. Bex has been absolutely bloody amazing. So she works for an organisation that has been tracking all of these attacks. And it was really through Bex's work and through her numbers that it became clear that we could easily see the patterns, and that we could also see that this was systematic. Because, of course, at the beginning, everybody's not sure, is it systematic? Is it there's random bombing? But it was really Bex's work really helped us. And then, we we then ended up in the kind of quagmire of the BBC. To be honest, that was the hardest part, wasn't it, of making this film? And another quick shout out before I pass it to you two. I think really this film, so many times, didn't we, Kareem? We just thought this film would never see the light of day because the BBC wanted to suppress it. And on that note, I'd like to thank Ben, because it was really his perseverance. Yeah, I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this 20 years. I've made loads and loads of films, and it is, I cannot tell you, it's you never come across an exec who really is fearless, stands up for what he believes in, is really principled, and just doesn't give up. My God, this man's a maniac.
Ben, you said to me when you asked me to do this that you didn't want this to be a BBC bashing debate, but
I've changed my mind.
I'm glad you changed your mind, because
I had a feeling that would happen.
Why? I mean, there's so much evidence in there, and they talk about their excuse was that they think it might look like we're a little bit biased. That is exactly what the BBC should be showing, isn't it? Because it's evidence led and it's truth, and that's the most important thing, surely.
I mean, you're seeing there, that's really the tale of, or our selections of the tale of what happened in Gaza and the doctors and to the doctors and hospitals over the first year and a half, I suppose, because the film was originally Naveen's idea. We got some commissioning money from them, some development money, and we were delivering another film about Gaza, and so they said, look, see if you can take it elsewhere, because we've already got one of your films about Gaza. So we took it to BBC Panorama. BBC Panorama were very, very interested. We did about 2 months development with them. They then said, we need to refer this upstairs. Next day, got a phone call saying, actually, the BBC's decided to do 3 programmes about the election, post-election.
In October.
In October. I was like, that's a real coincidence, that. They all said, yeah, but, and actually I looked in October, and they didn't do 3 films on elections. They did a film about digital stalking, important subject. They did another film about consumer rights. And I happen to know that there was a very short conversation with bosses, and it disappeared from Panorama. So we went to a part of the BBC called BBCI. It's part of BBC World Service. Does lots of investigations. We were working for a great commissioner called Mustafa Khalili. He took it on. I've never worked for the BBC before. There was a mysterious false equivalence around this story. There was caution, paranoia, fear that I've never seen. I've worked for Reuters, Sky News, and ITN, Channel 4 News. I was the editor of Channel 4 News. And I've realised I'd worked in very good, vertical, journalistic organisations where your boss would say, we're not doing that, and they'd tell you why, and it was always for a good editorial reason. I mean, once or twice at Sky they did want to upset the Premiership, but that's a different story. But anyway, no one would never tell you, but you'd be told by some person, I think we should put another right to reply in now. I'd say, you don't need to. And they go, well, you do? I go, no, you don't need to. I edited a TV news programme every day for 10 years. You only need to put a right to reply where it's relevant. And we'd have these long arguments. So that was difficult. But as soon as you got to another layer above, that person would again come in and want to put more balance in. And when I say balance, it's not balance, it's false balance, it's false equivalence. When you have one person dead on one side and 100 on the other, you don't put 10 minutes of that one person and 10 minutes of the other. You don't have to do it 100 to 1. And then, I mean, I was in meetings with compliance people who said, we're not sure we trust the United Nations as an independent source. And I said, hold on a minute. And he said, what are you doing? I said, say that again. And I wrote it down. And he said, why are you writing it down? I said, well, yesterday Trump said he's going to turn Gaza into a golf course. Today the BBC is saying it doesn't trust the United Nations as an independent source. That is a moment. And I said, let's just I got my laptop out and I put BBC, UN reports, and there were 100 different things, India, Bangladesh. I said, look, you trust them on India, trust them on Bangladesh. And he was like, yeah, we do, don't we? I was like, so what's the difference here? And I said, I think what you'll find is Israel doesn't trust the United Nations, not the BBC. This all took about 20 minutes. And then they said, oh, okay. They did the same with Amnesty. We really don't think Amnesty is an independent source. I said, no, you do, because here are 15 reports you had from Amnesty. You don't. Israel doesn't. And so what's happened is that the whole organisation is so fearful of that lobby, of that voice. And I'll say here, because I have to, and it's fair to say it, I was based in Israel in 2002 during the Second Intifada. I stayed in the centre of Jerusalem. It was subjected to about 40 Hamas suicide bombs. I was paranoid about Hamas. I was worried about them. I saw Israeli children at that time blown up by Hamas. So I wasn't a supporter of Hamas. But Hamas didn't blanket bomb Jerusalem. And I went into Gaza and I saw the return. But this is of a different scale. It's no longer a balanced war, and it hasn't been. And to give it the force equivalence is to allow it in a way, because the BBC is, I think, the world's most important news organisation, because it's so trusted. And it is shredding its reputation. It's shredding its balance. And it's... Should we say some more about the BBC or not? No. But in 2014, I'll give this one last story. We covered Gaza at Channel 4 News. Jon Snow went into Gaza, and you might remember, at that time there was a war in which about 1,400 people died and about 350 children. And John came back from Gaza and came into the studio. I was on holiday, and he did a very passionate speech to camera where he said, I've just been to Gaza. I've seen all these children die, and it's really upset me, and I want everyone to think about it. I want everyone to look at these pictures and think, why is this happening? And at the time, we actually pulled it because we thought it crosses over lines of impartiality. But it had a huge effect, and people were saying, why are so many people dying in Gaza? Now, at that point, for me as an editor, I always thought how many children are dying in the conflict, because it's a very good indication of how many civilians are dying and how harsh the conflict is. At that time, 350 children had died. You're now talking about 20,000. And if you take the medical projections from Lancet, it could be double that number. And it's still not, it's been covered less now on the BBC, and the pictures are being shown less than they were in 2014. So something's gone really, really badly wrong.
Kareem, what were the difficulties for you filming this?
Just the scale of the story, you know. I mean, it was really hard to pick. We've got a pretty mental whiteboard in the office. Yeah. We started looking at plotting the attacks on hospitals, and then looking at the stories of doctors who've been killed and taken into detention. And then when you start making the links between each person and each place, you realise the health system isn't just bricks and mortar; it's all these people. And we had some film structures where it's the kind of baton being passed between each person, and at the same time there's a lot of retrospective storytelling, and then it's unfolding at the same time. So it was really difficult to kind of get your head around. But I've got to say again that it's Bex and Moaf and Health Workers Watch. They were just the spine of throughout the film. I mean, all the way through through the entire production. I'd call Bex several times a day, asking her questions, and I can hear the beep, 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 because she's in intensive care. And I feel, all right, thanks. You can go and save someone's life now.
Ramita, you're interviewing people there doctors that have been tortured. I mean, how hard must that be to listen to?
God, do you know, I'm like Rosie. I'm probably a little bit like a Rosie and a bit of a psychopath because I'm kind of used to. Sorry, Rosie, you're not a psychopath. I am. In that, I guess it doesn't. You know, it's interesting because it doesn't always touch the sides. When you've done it for so long as I have, and you've heard so much testimony from so many places, but this has been very different. And I think we've spoken about this, haven't we? You know, the three of us have covered so many conflicts for so long, but this feels different. And it feels, so the interviews are different because, you know, all the way through, you are worried that this is not going to get censored. This is going to get censored and this is not going to get told. And I can tell you, nearly every single one of the people we interviewed told us they're never going to show this. The BBC are not going to show this. And we had to really persuade them. And of course it came true. And I really, at the time, I really did not, I genuinely persuaded them. I never thought it would get censored to this extent. So that's been the hardest part for me, has been facing all of these amazing people who have suffered as they have, you know, including the Israeli whistleblowers who are terrified, are still terrified, and also our two producers. You know, I had a message from Osama yesterday, I think, and Osama said, "I'm really scared. I'm not going to survive." You know, he's just said, I just want this to come out, and I'm so happy because I don't think I'm going to survive. Every day he's losing colleagues. So the hardest wasn't interviewing people, because that's what we do. It's, you know, that contributor care that the BBC really didn't care about and didn't ask us once.
Do you think they'll get a comeuppance? Do you think it will happen? Do you think eventually there'll be some form of answerability to what's going on over there?
I'm going to pass this one to Ben because he loves to talk. I would say, Ben, you know, that I think Ben and I are going to talk about this at some point. They did ask for major editorial changes, you know, that really unacceptable. And we're going to, you know, at some point, I think we're going to go public with the changes that they asked for. Ben, what do you think?
When you say comeuppance, do you mean the BBC or Israel? Or...
I was thinking Israel, really.
Well,
but where does this end?
Look, Israel is in a frenzied, genocidal state. I say that as someone who lived in Israel, and I understand. Everyone understands the Israeli story, the Jewish story. It's horrific, you know, and it's also, I think, if you speak to psychologists, and I don't want to give a diagnosis here, but a lot of it is unprocessed trauma that's being played out. But it's an extraordinary thing to watch it playing out and being able to watch it. That's what I can't understand. The first war that we could watch in real time was the end of the Sri Lankan War in 2009, and we made a film about it at Channel 4 because basically the Sri Lankan soldiers who were killing the Tamil rebels and all the civilians filmed it with their phones. That was very rudimentary phones, but you could make them. It's like, look, they did it. And the Sri Lankans said, "Oh no, you've made all this up." No one's denying it's happening in Israel because it's shot from 100 angles, and you can geolocate, and you can look at the metadata on the phone. You can look at, you know, it's HD quality. So yeah, those are 20 kids dead in a school. That's a hospital that's been bombed, and yet the political cover given to it, I think, given by our own government and by America and by everyone else, we are not aiding the state of Israel. We are enabling it to eat itself, to destroy itself. It's extraordinary, and there's no reason for it. And one of the most important things you have to do, you know, my time as editor also sort of coincided with the arc of people starting to get their news from social media. And we did an investigation into Cambridge Analytica that showed that social media could be manipulated and so on. We're always very worried that social media would take over. Social media is actually the place you go to see the war now, because the TV news isn't showing it to you, because they're not showing you the pictures you've watched on your phone all day. So then you watch TV and you're thinking, what the hell's that? I watched the week before last, and the longest sequence the BBC had about the Gaza war in the week when they were killing all the people who were going to pick up aid. They were shooting them. I think there were over 100 people killed. They had, this is me with my Tulia News obsession hat on, they had 3 sequences of 23 seconds, and then they had a sequence of 34 seconds. And guess what that was? It was about the fact they dropped our film and shitting all over us, saying we were partial. And by the way, they dropped our film 7 weeks before they told the country they dropped it. They'd already told us, we're not running that. We might run 3-minute sections. Anyway, I mean, the two, that's the BBC and Israel. They may be intertwined, to be honest.